Hi, I'm Mark Rader, Senior Pastor of Gaimea Baptist Church, and I'd like to welcome you to another series of New Horizons TV. In this series, we're going to be exploring the wisdom of the book of Proverbs, one of the most intensely practical and ignored sections of Scripture. We tend to ignore the wisdom literature because it seems so practical, it seems so secular, it's not interested in the religious aspects that we expect to find in Scripture. And yet, it is the intense practicality of the book of Proverbs that makes it so important for us. Over these next 11 weeks, we're going to be exploring the wisdom that God has built into the created order, that we can observe and see and put into practice in our day-to-day lives. And by living more wisely, we will live more successful lives in God's world. I trust that you will be challenged by what you hear, and that you'll be moved by what you hear, and that God will continue to change your life as you live wisely in His world. God bless.
You are calling us to follow. You are calling us to trust. You have seen all our tomorrows. Greater things are yet to come. You will lead us to new horizons.
With today's sermon in our series, Life Hacks, Pocket Tips from Proverbs for Better Living, here is Senior Pastor Mark Rader.
Today we are beginning a series entitled, as you see, Life Hacks, Pocket Tips from Proverbs for Better Living. This title indicates something really important about Proverbs as a type of literature, and that is that they are intensely practical. Proverbs are meant to be used, not just the biblical ones, but those proverbs that your mom and dad used to say to you, or that you as a mom or dad say to your children, right? These are little tips that you hope that will guide those that you love through life. And these proverbs that we're going to look at over the next several weeks fall into the same category. They are intensely practical for day-to-day living. And it's my prayer that sometime this week, and for the weeks of this series, that you will kind of come to a Wednesday morning or a Thursday afternoon meeting or a Friday day, something happens where you kind of go, you know what? I can use that proverb. I can actually apply that proverb to my life right here and right now. And so the proverb that we're beginning with today is found in Proverbs chapter 15. If you want to try to get to Proverbs chapter 15 before I read it to you, good luck. We're looking at one proverb. I'll read it twice, so it takes a little bit of time. Here we go. Chapter 15, verse 12. Mockers resent correction, so they avoid the wise. Mockers resent correction, so they avoid the wise. And this is not, by any stretch of the imagination, one of the most well-known proverbs in Scripture. There are probably a handful of proverbs that you are more familiar with. This is not kind of in that top 10 category, but it actually introduces for us one of the really important themes in the book of Proverbs, and that is about correction. But before we get there, let me just give you a little bit of information about Proverbs, stuff you probably really haven't thought too much about in terms of how they function. Proverbs, of course, are short, right? By definition, they're kind of short. If you go on and on and on and on and on and on and then call it a proverb, you've got the wrong genre, right? That's called a book or a tract or a discourse or a speech or something. Proverbs are always really short. And because they're short and really kind of pithy, they tend to be quite generalized. And so when we're looking at Proverbs, we're dealing with often caricatures of certain scenarios or situations. You all know what a caricature is. You've been to the Easter show or whatnot, where someone with a little bit of drawing ability draws caricatures of people. You might go up and they take one of your features, your nose, your smile, your glasses, your hair, your ears or something, and exaggerates it, hopefully for a comic effect, right? It's the same thing that works with political cartoons and editorial cartoons, where you can always determine who our leader is at the time, even though they've been exaggerated in some sort of way, shape, or form. In Scripture, in the book of Proverbs, there are a number of caricatures, and we encounter one of them here in the mocker. The mocker is a caricature that's found almost exclusively in Proverbs, but not always, and is kind of one type of character. There's a number of different characters you encounter. You've got the wise. They're the ones that we're trying to be like, and that's the whole goal and the aim of the book of Proverbs. Then you have the simple. And the simple tend to be young, and left to their own devices, they will eventually become fools. But there's hope for the simple, because they might listen to the wise and in fact become wise. And then you have the fools. They've decided that they'd rather remain simple and have gone down that pathway and have become foolish. And there's not much hope for them, but there's more hope for a fool than there is for a mocker. A mocker is the most kind of obstinate, hard-hearted type of fool. And the characteristic of the mocker that is exaggerated, right, for the effect is their pride. Now, it's possible to be proud anywhere, isn't it? You can be wise and quite proud of your accomplishments or your knowledge or your understanding and all of those sorts of things. But mockers, they, in this instance, for instance, they don't accept or listen to correction because they are always right. Ever met anyone like that? I'm not going to ask if you've ever been someone like that, right? You'd say no, because you're always right. So you're kind of caught in a loop there, aren't you, right? But mockers are those who, because of their pride and arrogance, are always right. So why would they need correction? Why would they listen to advice if they're always right? And so they don't. This theme of correction and how you respond to it is a really critical one in Proverbs. It's a bit of a rule of thumb. If you want to know, if you want to ask yourself, so am I on the road to wisdom? Ask yourself this question: how do you respond to correction? When someone corrects you or rebukes you or criticizes you or gives you advice that's unsolicited, how do you respond? If you respond by saying, "Thank you, I will learn from that," you are on the path to wisdom. If you say to yourself, "What do you know?" well, you're on the path to becoming a mocker, right? So this general rule of thumb for those who want to be wise is wrapped around how you respond to the correction and the advice and the counsel of those around you. But Proverbs, as I've already said, are general. And because they're general, there are certain times, certain circumstances, certain situations where they can't say everything. And so you actually find that different proverbs are used for different circumstances. And you can end up with mutually exclusive pieces of wisdom. Let me give you an example. He who hesitates is lost. Look before you leap. Well, which is it? If you try to do both of those things at the same time, you're going to pull something, right? So is it about not hesitating, or is it looking? Well, it's all contextual, isn't it? It's all about the right time. It's not enough to know the Proverbs. You've also got to know when to use them. So when your house is on fire, he who hesitates is lost. That's not the time to sit there and think about your strategy and wonder about the pros and cons of leaving through the front door or the back door. Just get out of the house. When you're investing your life savings in some sort of new business or scheme, you might want to take a few days to think about that one, right? You might want to get some advice. You might want to get some counsel and all those sorts of things. Proverbs are contextual. You find some of this even in some of the scriptures. In chapter 26 of the book of Proverbs, in verses 4 and 5, you have these two proverbs back to back. Do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you yourself will be just like him. Next verse. Answer a fool according to his folly, or he will be wise in his own eyes. So good luck figuring that one out. But there are times and places, aren't there? There are times and places where hesitation will be to our disadvantage, and there are times and places where just waiting a little bit is probably the wiser thing to do. And so when we come to any proverb, including this one here in chapter 15, it's worth asking ourselves, are there any circumstances in which rejecting correction might actually be wise? And there's a couple kind of aspects to it, aren't there? On the one hand, we've all probably received correction or rebuke or critique or advice in ways that's been unhelpful. You ever have that? Someone who's not really talking about the problem, but is really attacking you, very emotionally driven, given at the wrong kind of time. There's a big difference, isn't there, between being kind of taken to task on something in private and being taken to task about something in public, isn't there? Now, it's one thing for your boss to take you into his office and say, this is not working very well. It's another thing for him to do that in front of the whole group, isn't it? So there are times and places when how we receive correction makes it very difficult to receive. Well, that's one thing. But there are also some times, of course, when we should not listen to the advice of those around us. And that's when the people around us are fools. Now, the implication here is the mocker resents correction and then avoids the wise. They avoid the people who might actually help them. Right? They don't want to listen to them. So they're listening to somebody. Who are they listening to? Well, they're listening to themselves, or they're listening to others who just reinforce their worldview. There's a couple of quick examples in Proverbs chapter 1. In the prologue of the first 9 chapters, there are a couple of groups of people who the teacher advocates not listening to. In chapter 1, verse 10, it says, "My son, if sinful men entice you, do not give in to them. If they say, 'Come along with us, let's lie in wait for innocent blood, let's ambush some harmless soul, let's swallow them alive like the grave and whole like those who go down to the pit, we will get all sorts of valuable things and will fill our houses with plunder. My son, do not go along with them.'" Now, this is patriarchal language. It's a father to his son. I think we can quite easily and safely expand that to mums and dads, to sons and daughters. Women were and are perhaps more well represented in biblical wisdom traditions than any other aspect of Scripture. But the language here. So there are violent men in particular, or those who want to get rich quick at the expense of others, and wisdom says, don't listen to that advice. When I was thinking about my own experience, I am more likely to receive correction and rebuke and instruction and advice when the outcome is important to me. When the outcome is important to me. Right, so I know that many of you have jobs where you are overseeing pretty significant projects in your company, right? They have significant attachments to your KPIs. They might have really significant financial kind of value for the organization. And therefore, because of the importance of those projects, it is wise for you to get advice from others around you. You don't want to just kind of steamroll into something, not listen to anybody, and potentially lose the company a great deal of money or a really important client, or perhaps lose your job. With our children, why do we read books on how to raise kids or grandchildren? Why do we do that? Well, because we want our kids to grow up and turn out to be reasonable human beings, right? And so we take the advice of those around us. Why do we get a second opinion from a doctor about our health? Because my health is important to me. And if there's a different prognosis or a better prognosis, then I would like to know about it. So we are far more likely to accept advice when the direction, the outcome, the circumstance, the result is important to us, right? In our investments, even in our holidays. We want to have a great holiday, and so we ask people, hey, where should we go or what should we do? God bless you all. Some of you still come to me and ask me what you should do in Canada, even though it's been 20 years since I was there. I don't know. I'll keep telling you go see a hockey game. That's kind of as far as my advice goes. But thank you for making me feel like I'm still from Canada, right? But we're seeking advice, right, in order that we have the outcome that we're actually after. And the people who lead us, who advise us, who counsel us, don't even actually have to be Christians, do they? If you read all the way through Job and Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, and I would argue Song of Songs as well falls into the wisdom literature, you are not going to read a lot about the promises of God to Abraham. Something that's critical to the overall arc of redemption history is basically ignored. You're not going to hear about how the people of Israel were rescued out of Egypt, out of slavery. That's not going to get a mention. You're not going to get much at all about the law of Moses or the great covenant promises of God to his people or to David. You're not going to hear much about offerings and sacrifices or the temple or Jerusalem or even the promises to the monarchy. That's just all kind of left to one side. It's not actually the primary interest. And in part, it's because of where Proverbs and proverbial wisdom comes from. Proverbial wisdom is based on observation, not revelation. Because the other thing you're not going to find in the book of Proverbs is, "Thus saith the Lord," or an angel spaketh unto me, saying thusly. Right? That's how an angel would speak, right? Right? This is not stuff that comes by divine revelation. It's not like an angel visited Solomon and said, hey, listen, I've got some really hot proverbial wisdom, hot off the press of heaven. No one would ever have figured this one out unless we revealed it to them. And that is that mockers resent correction, so they avoid the wise. Never figured that one out without God. No, we probably would have, wouldn't we? And it's all based, here's the theology, it's all based on our understanding and our belief that God created the whole universe. The material universe, rocks and trees and birds and bees, and the moral universe. Why is it that those who do not take advice come to ruin? Well, it's because God designed the world that way. He designed the world in such a way that an appropriate level of humility is good to prospering. He designed the world in such a way that a certain degree of codependence on one another is actually going to lead to success. That's how God created the moral world. And so anyone who carefully observes God's world will inevitably stumble upon some of these patterns that God has woven into the very fabric of our world and can, in some way, shape, or form, become wise. However, the book of Proverbs begins by giving us the true foundation of wisdom, and that is the fear of the Lord. I've used this example before. I have a mentor down in Melbourne, Alan. He's a slightly statured Canadian fellow who strikes fear in the hearts of no one. But I fear Alan, as you ought to fear the Lord. In other words, if I call Alan up and I say, I've got a situation that I'm working through, I'd like your advice. I've got two options. I can kind of do A or I can do B. And if I say, I think I should do B, and Alan says you should do A, I am dropping plan B like it is hot, right? Because I fear Alan. And while he is not God and he may not be right, he's probably right anyways. And what kind of a person would I be to try something other than what he would recommend? You have people like this in your life? People whose opinion you respect so deeply that you think twice about doing things against what they would advise. That's the fear of the Lord. Where we would think twice about doing anything other than what God calls us to. In this sense, then, if you turn to Psalm chapter 1, if you have your Bibles with you, Psalm chapter 1 tells us another little bit about this truth of the fear of the Lord. And it's also one of the places where we find the caricature of the mocker. I mentioned it's almost exclusively in Proverbs. Here's one that comes outside of it. Psalm 1, first 3 verses. Blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way that sinners take, or sit in the company of mockers, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and who meditates on his law day and night. That person is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever they do prospers. And so we would say that it's not quite enough just to observe the world, to have a good look at everything that happens and kind of go, you know what, there's some patterns here that are probably the hand of God. It's also appropriate for those of us who follow Jesus to know all of the law, to meditate on all that has not only been observed to be true, but also that which has in the law been revealed to be true. This is where our understanding of wisdom comes, but it also raises, I think, a really significant point of application. We talk about or are willing to receive advice and receive counsel when the outcome that we are seeking is really important. When the outcome is important. Let me back up again. I mentioned before that you can have mutually exclusive proverbs, wisdom that kind of falls on both sides of the fence, so to speak. Wisdom that talks about one half of a truth and wisdom that talks about another half. You may be familiar with this quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson, the 18th century American poet, who said, life is a journey, not a destination. You're familiar with that concept? In fact, it's very, very popular in our world. This whole idea that what really matters is the journey and how you get there. And so that's the important piece. But we're actually missing the other side of it, aren't we? Nearly everything that I looked up in terms of Google Images and whatnot with images of journey and destination was all this stuff about the journey, the journey, the journey, the journey. And the journey is important, isn't it? How you get places does matter. And if you miss the journey for the destination, well, you've missed something really important. That's true. However, the destination is also pretty important. If you have your project team working on this really significant project for your company, and you have a lot of fun, and you come up with some really amazing plans, and you bring in all sorts of networks, and you do some really innovative stuff, but you fail to hit the financial targets, the journey doesn't matter. Because the destination was more important. And if we think that our kids and our marriages and our work and how we learn, if we think that's all important, what about our relationship with God? What about the outcome of following after Jesus? The outcome of becoming more like him, of becoming in character and in word and in deed more and more and more like Jesus. How important is that to us? And if I can bring it back to this proverb then, do we seek the wise or do we avoid them? It is really easy to come to church and apart from listening to a sermon, to not have any spiritual conversations with anyone, isn't it? We get caught up talking about what happened last week and what you do over the weekend and where are you going this week and how was your holiday and how are the kids. And those are all really good and important things, but we can actually manage to not have the conversations that perhaps we most need. About checking in and about getting some course corrections and about getting some advice about how we can become more like Jesus, about how we can follow Jesus a little bit more faithfully. Oh, I've been in life groups. Sometimes you can get through a whole life group without having a spiritual conversation, right? And sometimes there's a time and a place for that. But we can end up becoming really wise in how we do business. And when there's a big project, we get all the advice that we need. And we can get really wise in terms of how we raise our kids. And we get all the advice and counsel that we need. And yet, we can actually become mockers in our own spirituality because we never seek out the wise. We never have the conversations. We never ask the questions. We never ask people to give us some feedback on how we're going. We don't ask for critique. We don't ask for review. We don't ask for counsel. And we can effectively become mockers who resent correction in that which we believe is the most significant thing in our lives. Ever think about it that way? I'm sure that there'll be an opportunity this week to use this proverb. I'm sure of it. Someone will tell you how you should parent your kids, or someone will tell you what you should be doing at work. There'll be a big decision you'll have to make, and you'll think to yourself, I should be wise and gather some counsel here, gather some advice. I'm sure there's an opportunity for you to use this. Can I also, though, encourage you perhaps next time you sit down to pray, or next time you sit down to read the Word, or next time you're in your life group, to bring this proverb to mind then. That mockers resent correction, and so they avoid the wise. To take those opportunities perhaps to gain some counsel, some advice, and to set aside our pride, because that's what it comes down to, doesn't it? I don't want you to think that I'm less mature than I appear on a Sunday morning. I don't want you to think that I don't really have it all figured out. I don't want to lose face or have my reputation tarnished, and so I never ask the question, I never put myself out there, and so we just blissfully journey from the potential path of wisdom to simpletons, to fools, to mockers. A pocket tip from Proverbs for better living.
We hope you've enjoyed today's New Horizons program. You can download the companion study guides for each program from the Guymer Baptist Church website. Go to guymerbaptist.org.au/New Horizons. These are available for each episode, or you can download the whole series. Guymer Baptist Church in Sydney's southern suburbs is a contemporary evangelical church seeking to serve our local community and help them to know Jesus. At the heart of all we do is the desire to help people love God in all aspects of their lives. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can do so via the contact page on our website or visit our Facebook page.
The book of Proverbs is amongst the most intensely practical literature in the Bible, designed for day-to-day use. And the proverb we looked at today, wrapped around correction, was one of the best. This theme of how we respond to correction and how we seek advice is critical in every area of our lives, as parents, as teachers, as workers, and as followers of Jesus. I trust that you've been challenged to think through again where you get advice from, who you seek advice about, and how you want to proceed into the destination of becoming more like Jesus. Trust that we'll see you again real soon. God bless.